On behalf of the Board of Directors of the Family Process Institute, it is my absolute honor to welcome you here today. I know that some of you may have had pause in coming because of the pandemic and the different variants that exist, but we are truly delighted to have you here and to be able to do this. It was in 1961 when Nathan Ackerman, Donald Jackson, and Jay Haley co-founded Family Process. It was the first ever journal in family therapy, and since it has held a very impressive and distinguished place in the field of family therapy. And we owe that to editors before, but our current editor, Jay LeBeau, and Noel Schlesinger. So if they could stand and be applauded. Thank you. And to make this possible, we have a very capable assistant to the board, Laurie Burnside. And now I have the privilege of introducing the two co-chairs of this 60th anniversary celebration, Mary Ann Wambolt and William Turner. So I'll welcome them to the podium. Thank you very much.
Good morning and welcome again. It's great to see everybody. New faces for me and many old friends, so this is wonderful. I'm going to start by just doing some logistics of the meeting. Today's meeting, all three speakers are going to be on Zoom. Evan because of health concerns within her family, and the other two because of fears of COVID and not really knowing us that much. So you will see their speeches. We will still be able to do questions and answers. If you are going to ask them questions, I ask you use one of the microphones and kind of face towards the center of the room rather than just that way so that the camera can capture you and your question on tape. We will be recording all of these sessions for the board to use for teaching purposes as they wish. So your questions and answers will be heard better if you're at the mic, and you will be on the film as well. In the interest of being safe for COVID, if you're eating or drinking, you may take off your masks. If you're speaking, please take off your masks so that we can understand you better. But otherwise, we're supposed to keep masks on when inside in Washington, D.C. So that's the protocol. If you need bathrooms, you go out the doors, take two lefts. So go towards the stairs, take a left, and the bathrooms are on that corridor. And I think those are the main logistic issues we wanted to do. You want me to keep going?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So as William and I planned this, it was invaluable to me to have William's wisdom in this. He's clearly lived these issues in his skin and in his body much longer than I have. As a white woman who grew up in suburban Chicago, I hadn't met a black person until I was a foreign exchange student after my junior year of high school, which was pretty strange, but that was America in the 50s and 60s. It was easy to do that. When I was a foreign exchange student, I lived in Malaysia, and I was the only white person there. So everybody that were my friends, that were my colleagues, my family were either Asian or Indian or Malay. Everybody had a prettier skin color than I did. And still, I had white privilege. You know, I would walk down the street and literally strangers would come out and put an umbrella over my head so I wouldn't burn my skin in the sun. So even though I was in a minority, it was a minority of privilege. And I didn't realize that initially. It also took me, for those of you who heard the story yesterday about getting over anxiety to strangers, it took me probably about 10 days to 2 weeks to feel comfortable in that new pool of people. I put it down as homesickness. I was 16, I didn't know much, but as I process it as an adult, I think some of it was also this strangeness of not being in the majority skin color anymore. I want to fast forward to college, where sophomore year in the dorm I lived in, one of my best friends was an African-American woman from Washington, D.C. She was bright, she was funny, she was committed to social justice. She has since gone on to teach at Harvard and Stanford in methods of early education and in anti-discrimination issues. We still stay in contact. But junior year, I was an RA in the dorm, pretty much all freshman girls, both black, white, etc. I became very close to several other RAs in that dorm, and literally we had race riots. I mean, I remember coming home from the library Sunday night, and all the white girls were locked in the bathroom, and all the black girls were in the hallway, and they were yelling at each other. It's like, what do we do about this? You know, so we started to try to figure out how to calm things down. Senior year of college, these other RAs, white women, all good Catholic girls, I was at a Jesuit school, we were going to rent a flat together, and it was a large flat, but you had to rent it from June to June, and none of us were going to be there for the summer. So my friend, African-American friend Jan, had called and said, you know, I just got this position on campus, I have to be here for the summer, do you know of any place I could stay? And I said, sure, you could sublet our place, you know, just pay whatever I would pay for those months, and you'll be living alone, but it should a nice location, etc. I thought nothing of that. I told some of these other young women, we were all back home for the summer at this point, and I didn't hear any feedback right away. And then a week later, I get this angry call. You should have talked to all of us. This is not okay. You cannot let somebody live in our apartment without having discussed it first. I was kind of taken aback. You know, again, I was young. I thought, well, maybe I should have done that. That was not a very polite thing to do. But then they demanded that I tell Jan she could no longer sublet the apartment. That was very painful. And I was stewing about why in the world did this come up? You know, maybe I didn't communicate. Maybe it's because she's black. Maybe it's because she's not one of the cool people. Some of these other RAs were with the cool group. I was not, but maybe that was it. In September, I show up to go back to school and live in the apartment, and suddenly they've invited not one, but two white girls to share this large flat with us without having consulted me. And at that point, I knew it was because she was black. And I didn't know how to deal with that. At that time, this was the early 70s in America, white people did not talk about race. We were not brought up to talk about this issue in any way, shape, or form that would have been helpful. And even though I was pretty sure that was why they rejected her and me, I wasn't able to talk to them. And it was a very tense year. I ended up losing friendships with at least the four people who initially, all five of them, because of that unspoken tension. So I'm bringing this story up now as a way to say racism affects all of us, whatever color we are, whatever race we are. I think for us white folks, we can ignore it for the most part, and we're not conscious of it for the most part, unless we start thinking about stories like this. And now, in retrospect, I'm thinking, man, that was a horrible turn in my life. I lost people who I thought were good friends, and we did not have any constructive conversations about it. So one of the things we're going to challenge you to do during this meeting is think about stories of your own of where racism affected you personally, or whether you felt you should have done something and felt you couldn't do something to make a situation better, and how we might learn to speak out more about this, because we are all experts in helping people speak about difficult subjects. And unless we start the conversation and start speaking this amongst everyone in the country, we're not going to get beyond the horrible 400 years that some of us went to the African American History and Culture Museum yesterday, which really depicts the story in an amazingly powerful way of, you know, what systemic racism has done to us as a people living in this country. We didn't choose it. We didn't create it. Our generation didn't create it. But we're all in this house together. And if we don't decide what we're going to do to fix it, we're going to be stuck with these problems for a lot longer. So we're hoping that in the small group discussions, and we will randomize you in various ways, you start feeling more comfortable sharing those stories. That I think if we can get beyond some of the anxiety of speaking how it's affected us, we can help others do the same thing.
Thank you, Marianne. Again, welcome here today. We're so happy that we're finally realizing this conference, something that we've been planning and working on for the last 18 months or 20 years, I don't know. But it's been a long time in coming, and we're really excited about it. I wanted to share 3 stories today about institutional racism, and believe me, it was really hard to narrow it down to just 3. I've been a professor at 4 different universities, and there has been a racial incident at each of those universities, sometimes personally happening to me. So the first story I want to share is with a student of mine when I was a professor at the University of Minnesota. We had recruited this wonderful African-American woman to come to be a student in our graduate program in family therapy. She was in great demand, and there were universities around the country who were vying for her, but she decided to come to the University of Minnesota because she wanted to work with me and some other of the faculty members there. In her second year, when she was starting to really in earnest think about her dissertation, she went to the library on a Saturday, as students often do, and studied all day. And when she left, she had checked out about 15 or 20 books that she was taking with her, and she had them in a backpack. As she began to walk out of the library, somebody called the university police to say that there's a suspicious person and you need to check out what she has in her bag. So as she's walking out of the library, about 10 university police cars in full light with police came and accosted her and very gruffly asked her, "Can we see what's in your bag?" And she wasn't hesitant to open that up to her, but just the whole experience of being in the library, doing what you're supposed to do as a graduate student on a Saturday, being under suspicion. Not only that, but she was really embarrassed that other people that she knew saw her with the police, holding her to the side. She was devastated. Completely devastated. On the Monday, she called me and said, I'm leaving this university. I cannot be here. I don't feel safe here. I don't feel wanted here. And I convinced her to that she didn't want to throw away everything that she had done to this point. She was very sort of close to nailing down her dissertation, and then she could go off and write that someplace else and not necessarily do it in Minneapolis. But in the meantime, I called the university chief of police to have a sit-down meeting with her and him, because I felt like at the very least they needed to make an apology to her. But that didn't happen. He came into that meeting and continued to interrogate her. Now, I'm an empowered professor there, so I wasn't having it, and made it clear that they needed to apologize what they'd done to this student. And he sort of came around that if you felt uncomfortable or unsafe with what we did, then we're sorry. Not that what we did, but that you felt the way that you did. And so, again, this is not an uncommon thing that happens on university campuses. Many people don't know about it. Most white people don't know that these kinds of things happen, but they happen to students all the time. Fast forward, I take a job at Vanderbilt University. I go to Vanderbilt as a distinguished professor, endowed chair, and I came there with quite a lot of notoriety and recognition. I had worked for Barack Obama. I'm sure that's one of the reasons that Vanderbilt felt like they wanted to have a person like me on their faculty. I had worked on the ACA, and there were pictures of me all over the newspaper and all over the campus. And I go out walking one afternoon shortly after I get there to just familiarize myself with the campus. And I'm walking, and I notice that that there are these two policemen following me. And I thought, why are they following me? Is there something about me? I was dressed kind of like I am now, so I thought I looked like what a university professor was supposed to look like. And it was about 4 in the afternoon. It wasn't dark. I wasn't doing anything really suspicious. But I decided, well, I'll go in a different direction, one that maybe if they really aren't following me, but they followed me. Oh. And finally, they came up and accosted me and said, what are you doing on this campus? Who are you? Where are you? And they were asking these questions in this very sort of rapid paced style. And I'm like, what is the issue here? I have my faculty ID if you would like to see it. And so I pull out may I pull it out, I asked, because at that point I wasn't sure who they thought I was or what was going to happen. I pulled it out and showed them. Oh, and their response was, oh, okay, have a good day. And here I am, a new professor at this university that I had come to, and all of a sudden I'm being accosted by police officers. Now, again, as an empowered person, I went straight to the chancellor. I think one of those police officers was put on suspension. But that doesn't happen to the average person who comes there. Also, on a similar walk on the Vanderbilt campus, I was just walking in this area that is very beautiful, is known to be a very beautiful part of campus. It's called the Peabody campus. And as I walked through the campus and looked at the beautiful antebellum buildings, I noticed on the frieze above one of the buildings, Confederate Memorial Hall. I mean, as big as life. I was stunned that in the 2000s that university, particularly of the status of Vanderbilt, would have a building with that name. I remember just going and asking again my dean and others, what's up with this? I don't get it. I don't understand it. Because they only referred to it as Memorial Hall. I'd heard of Memorial Hall, but nobody called it Confederate Memorial Hall. And the story is that the building was initially funded by the Daughters of the Confederacy. And if Vanderbilt were to remove that name from the building, they would have to pay back the Daughters of Confederacy the amount of money that they invested in the building, but not in 1924 dollars, but in 2010 dollars. And they just didn't think that that was a good way for them to use their money. And that name persisted until George Floyd last year. And then all of a sudden they found the money to take it down and to rename that building. Okay, fast forward, I know these are long stories, but I just want you to have a sense of what we go through as people of color. Again, in that institution, that was institutional racism. It was built into the institution. They didn't see the impact that something like that would have on many of their faculty and students, not just students of color, but people who were enlightened and did not want that sort of thing to happen. Fast forward to the university that I'm at now. In 2016, I decided to take an early retirement from Vanderbilt and to go to this small liberal arts Christian university called Lipscomb University, where I work primarily in administration, and was invited personally to come there by the president, and he gave me all sorts of bells and whistles to make it worth my while to move from Vanderbilt to this small institution, and I have enjoyed it quite a lot. But in 2018, the president and his wife decided to invite a group of African American students to their home, and they were going to have a dinner in their very nice house, and decided to serve them what are kind of stereotypical, African American food. So there was like collard greens and sweet potatoes and fried chicken and stuff like that, which in and of itself, I think, was offensive to the students. But that didn't really cap the issue. The centerpieces on the table were raw cotton stalks. And apparently this had been a design choice that was utilized in a lot of Southern living magazines and things like that, and they decided to do that. Well, of course, the students were highly offended by that. Some took pictures of it, and it went viral. So the next morning, in the New York Times, in the Washington Post, in the LA Times, and USA Today, and on Good Morning America, this small institution in Nashville, Tennessee, was being highlighted. And the president couldn't understand why anybody was upset about it. He just couldn't really understand it. So I'm having to sit down with him and say, you made a really big mistake. And part of it is you don't understand. You just don't understand the not only the history, but the power of those kinds of symbols and how hurtful they are. So he went on an apology tour, and he handled it as best as he could, and we take it as a learning experience. But the fact that those kinds of things could happen in this day and time are indicative of the kinds of just institutional things. And I'm really just describing the sort of smaller microaggressions that happen, because there are bigger and more violent things that happen on university campuses each and every day. And so as we think about this conference and the kinds of things that we have to confront, some are like what Marianne said, we have to look at our sort of personal kinds of experiences and learning experiences, but we also have to be aware of those larger institutional offenses to that promote racism and that keep us apart. And so as we think about this and we tell our own stories and we think about our stories, I hope that we can be open to sharing our stories, but also listening to those that others want to share. Thank you so much.